I used to think surviving was the same as living. For a long time, I didn't even question it. Survival sounded practical, responsible, something adults were supposed to be good at. You get through the day. You don't fall apart. You keep things moving. I did all of that. From the outside, my life looked steady, predictable. I woke up when I was supposed to, went where I was supposed to go, did what needed to be done, and came back home tired but intact. Bills were paid. Messages were answered. Nothing urgent was breaking. That felt like success. I told myself that wanting more was immature. That intensity fades with age. That people who talk about passion and meaning usually end up disappointed. I believed stability was the reward for endurance. So I endured. At first, surviving felt temporary. Like a phase. Something you pass through before things open up again. I told myself I was conserving energy, that later I would feel alive again when things slowed down, when pressure eased, when I had room to breathe. Later became a place I never arrived at. Days began to repeat without resistance. Weeks stacked neatly on top of each other. I stopped marking time by moments and started measuring it by tasks completed. I could tell you what I had done, but not what I had felt. Feeling wasn't required. I noticed it one morning while standing in front of the mirror, getting ready automatically. I recognized the routine more than the person. The face looking back at me didn't look unhappy. It looked functional. That should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me. I realized how little of myself was actually needed to keep my life running. I could be tired, distracted, emotionally absent and nothing would stop. The machine worked without me. So I stepped back. Not consciously. Gradually. I stopped reacting strongly to things. I stopped expecting days to feel different. I stopped asking myself what I wanted, because wanting felt impractical. Survival doesn't ask questions. It just continues. People around me didn't notice anything wrong. Why would they? I wasn't failing. I wasn't complaining. I wasn't causing problems. I was dependable. Calm. Low maintenance. They said I was handling things well. I believed them. Inside, something was dimming. Not painfully. Quietly. Like a light you don't realize has been turned down because it happens slowly. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt neutral. Neutral felt safe. At night, when everything was still, I felt a dull pressure in my chest. Not anxiety. Not panic. Just the awareness that I was exhausted in a way sleep didn't fix. I would lie there and think about how long it had been since I felt genuinely involved in my own life. The answer was never clear. I remembered a time when my days had edges. When choices scared me because they mattered. When uncertainty made my heart race because something was at stake. Back then, fear meant I was alive. Now fear felt unnecessary. I had organized my life to avoid it. The most unsettling part was realizing how proud I had been of that. How often I had praised myself for being resilient, for not breaking, for keeping everything together. I hadn't noticed that resilience had slowly replaced desire. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was maintaining. Survival doesn't look dramatic. That's why it's dangerous. It looks like responsibility. Like discipline. Like maturity. It convinces you that staying upright is enough. One evening, after another day that left no memory behind, a thought surfaced, calm, heavy, impossible to ignore. If this is all my life ever is, I will never collapse, but I will never arrive anywhere either. That was the first time I felt afraid. Not of failure. Not of loss. But of surviving my entire life without actually being there for it. I hadn't ruined my life. I hadn't made a catastrophic mistake. I had simply mistaken survival for living. And I was starting to understand that surviving too long can erase you just as effectively as losing everything at once. After that thought settled in, I will never collapse, but I will never arrive anywhere either. Survival stopped feeling neutral. It didn't become painful right away. It became visible. And once you see it, you can't go back to not seeing it. I started noticing how carefully my life was built to require as little of me as possible. My routines were efficient, predictable, emotionally light. They didn't demand presence, only compliance. I could move through entire days without making a single choice that felt personal. At first, that realization made me defensive. I told myself this was what stability looked like. That adulthood wasn't supposed to feel intense. That people who constantly talk about meaning are usually avoiding responsibility. I reminded myself how many times survival had saved me from chaos, from uncertainty, from making irreversible mistakes. Those arguments had always worked. Now they sounded like excuses. I noticed how often I avoided anything that might wake me up emotionally. Difficult conversations. Unclear opportunities. Questions without immediate answers. I treated emotional discomfort like a threat to the system I had built. And the system was fragile. Not because it could break, but because it only worked if I stayed numb. My body began to resist in ways I could no longer dismiss. Sleep stopped restoring me. I woke up already tired, as if I had spent the night bracing myself against my own life. Ordinary moments came with a tightness in my chest, standing in line, driving familiar roads, listening to conversations I had heard before. Sometimes my heart would race without reason. I would stop, breathe, tell myself nothing was wrong. Everyone feels like this sometimes, I said. But this wasn't stress. Stress comes from doing too much. What I felt came from not moving at all. I began grieving things I hadn't technically lost. Not a job. Not a relationship, not a dream I could name. I grieved momentum. Direction. The version of myself who once believed that fear meant something mattered. That version felt distant now. Almost embarrassing. Like someone I used to know before I learned how dangerous wanting could be. Late at night, I replayed memories not to relieve them, but to audit them. I looked for the moment when survival became my identity instead of a phase. When staying upright became more important than moving forward. There was no single moment. Just accumulation. I almost spoke up. I almost chose differently. I almost trusted myself. Each time, I told myself I was being smart. Each time, relief followed. And relief slowly taught me that avoiding life felt better than risking it. That realization hurt more than any obvious failure ever could have. The moral dilemma became unavoidable. If I continued surviving the way I had been, nothing dramatic would happen. That was the promise. I would remain stable, intact, functional. I would age quietly inside a life that asked nothing of me emotionally. If I tried to live truly live, I would disrupt everything I had optimized. I would invite uncertainty, disappointment, regret of a different kind. I would have to confront the possibility that I had been surviving for so long that I no longer knew how to live. That possibility terrified me. Some nights, the idea of disappearing crossed my mind. Not dying, disappearing. Leaving the life that felt like a holding pattern. Starting somewhere I wasn't already defined by endurance and restraint. The idea scared me. It also made my chest feel lighter. That contradiction stayed with me. I tried to argue myself back into survival. I reminded myself how dangerous it is to destabilize a working life. How many people wish they had my calm, my structure, my ability to keep going. Those thoughts used to calm me. Now they made me feel trapped. Then came a moment so small I almost dismissed it. Someone asked me, casually, without pressure, "Are you happy, or just coping?" I laughed it off at first. Gave a vague answer. Something polite. Something survivable. But the question followed me home. I realized I didn't know the answer anymore. Coping had replaced choosing. Endurance had replaced desire. I wasn't unhappy, I was absent. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, but because something in me refused to return to autopilot. I understood that my life wasn't broken. It was paused by habit. And the longer I stayed in survival mode, the harder it would be to remember what living even felt like. For the first time, surviving felt like an active decision instead of a default. And once you see that, neutrality disappears. Every day you choose not to live becomes a choice in itself. I didn't know yet what I would do. But I knew this: survival had stopped protecting me. It was slowly replacing me. And if I didn't interrupt it, there would eventually be nothing left to interrupt. I didn't escape survival in a single, dramatic act. There was no clean break, no moment that split my life into before and after. What changed was quieter and harder to undo. I stopped numbing myself to get through the day. That sounds small. It wasn't. Survival had trained me to mute anything that threatened efficiency: doubt, longing, grief, excitement. Those feelings slowed me down. They complicated decisions. They made life less manageable. So I had learned to keep them distant, like background noise you stop noticing after a while. Letting them back in felt dangerous. The first thing I felt wasn't joy. It was fear, raw and specific. Fear of making choices that couldn't be reversed. Fear of discovering that the years I spent surviving had cost me chances I could never reclaim. Fear of becoming someone who wants things again and has to live with disappointment. For a while, that fear almost pushed me back into numbness. It would have been easy. Survival was familiar. It worked. It didn't ask me to risk anything except myself. But once you recognize survival for what it is, returning to it feels like a lie you have to actively maintain. So I began with interruption. I changed the pace of my days. I stopped filling every empty space with noise or obligation. I let boredom surface instead of smothering it. I allowed myself to sit with discomfort long enough to understand what it was pointing toward. That was when the grief arrived. Not all at once, but steadily. I grieved the years I had spent coping instead of choosing. I grieved the version of myself who once believed fear meant something mattered. I grieved all the ordinary days that passed without leaving marks because I wasn't really there to receive them. Some days, that grief felt heavier than numbness ever had. But it was honest. Living again didn't feel inspiring. It felt exposed. I doubted myself constantly. I second-guessed decisions that used to be automatic. I felt awkward, uncertain, unfinished, like someone relearning how to exist without instructions. I made mistakes. Real ones. The kind you can't dismiss as just being careful. I chose things that didn't work out. I said yes when I should have said no, and no when I should have tried. And for the first time in a long while, those mistakes didn't flatten me. They anchored me. I could trace my days back to my own choices, even when they hurt. Even when they disappointed me. Especially then. Pain connected me to my life in a way numbness never had. Some relationships shifted. A few didn't survive. The version of me who required nothing and caused no friction had been easier to keep around. This version, hesitant, questioning, emotionally present, was less convenient. Losing that ease hurt. But it clarified something I had avoided for years: being easy is not the same as being alive. Stability without presence is just a well-organized absence. Over time, my days began to feel heavier, not because they were harder, but because they mattered again. Time stopped slipping through me unnoticed. Even quiet moments carried weight because I was actually there for them. I stopped measuring my life by how well I held it together and started noticing how deeply I inhabited it. I learned something I wish I had known earlier: survival is meant to be temporary. It's a bridge, not a destination. When you stay there too long, it turns into a cage that looks like safety from the outside. If you're listening to this and telling yourself you're just getting through a phase, ask yourself honestly how long you've been getting through it. Ask yourself whether survival is still protecting you, or slowly replacing you. Because one day, without warning, you may realize that nothing ever broke, and you still never arrived anywhere. I thought I was living. I was just surviving. Choosing to live again didn't make my life easier. It made it real. And reality, with all its uncertainty, grief, and risk, was still worth more than a lifetime spent quietly getting through the day.